So you can continue to sit. In our tradition, meditation and listening to a talk are one and the same. And I'll start with a homage to the triple gem, and usually just the speaker does this. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasami. There's a story I've talked about before. When the French were bombing Ubon in northeast Thailand in the 1940s, Ajahn Nisabho, who was a famous teacher in the Forest tradition, was taken on a boat into Laos, and he'd been stung by a swarm of hornets, which in Thailand is a fairly dangerous thing to encounter. And he was gravely ill. So 2 days down the Mekong into Laos, the boat finally came to a town called Basak. And Ajahn Nisabho looked up and asked, "Are we there yet?" And they said yes. And then he walked up to the small village temple and he bowed 3 times. And then on the 3rd bow, he didn't rise. And that was how he passed away. And I find that recollection of what the quality of transcendence means to be powerful. One of the people here this morning was speaking about their loss of faith in their Christian upbringing, when they stopped believing in anything beyond this material world which we see and can touch. And one of the things I've so appreciated about Buddhism is, while the Buddha did articulate teachings and descriptions of the world which deal with things that happen after death, with that which we cannot see, those aspects were never necessary for one to practice. The Pali Canon, all 22,000 pages of it, 12 times the length of the Bible, is overwhelmingly and astonishingly, if you really consider it, descriptions again and again of the Buddha talking to people about how to train their minds, how to ameliorate greed, hatred, and delusion, and come to a place where the heart is utterly pure and selfless. And while nibbana, or awakening, is described as something apart from the conditioned world, we don't have to take that completely to begin practice. What we can understand and know is that there is some quality or part or potential in the human heart which is immune to conditions. There are stories not just of someone like Ajahn Nisabho encountering death with a level of faith that allowed him to bow into his final moments, but also of, say, the friend of the Tibetan Lama, or the Dalai Lama, who was imprisoned by the Chinese for 18 years and emerged saying that his greatest fear was that he would lose loving kindness for his captors, but that he didn't. And last Wednesday, we spoke with Ajahn Kusalo, a wonderful monk from New Zealand, about how to navigate the news and what to do when this conditioned realm, Ukraine, war, all these things, begin to weigh on the mind. And he was reflecting that we have to acknowledge our sphere of influence and come back to the practice, using the condition to transcend conditions, using these imperfect tools we have, these imperfect lives, the family, the relationships, the job, the unpleasant boss, all of it, as stepping stones to let go into something greater. And while one can look at each of these as obstacles, the kid, the job, as things keeping you from the practice, such a view misses the fact that if one is maintaining a modicum of practice and meditation in one's life, then every part of a life can be used as a tool to shape intention towards greater kindness. And I remember frequently one member of this community who's not here, who for many years felt like he was stuck between responsibility to his family and son and a desire to ordain. And he explored the ordination option and went to a monastery, and a teacher said, "You need to go back and care for your son." And when he went back and gave himself wholeheartedly to that single task, it became the basis and the means towards all of his practice, instead of a hindrance to it. He said that he frequently keeps the 3 first paramitas. These are the spiritual qualities. There's 10 of them. But the first 3 are dana, sila, and nekama: giving, morality, renunciation. And he said that he used these as almost a mantra every moment, saying, what can I give in this moment? What can I give up in this moment? How can I act utterly correctly in this moment? And although he still lives the lay life in some sense, I think he's more monastic than most monks I know, or many monks that I know. All to say that kama can be looked at as either a tool to punish us or to be an obstacle to us, or we can look at it as a gentle hand guiding us towards something greater. And this is the essence of faith in Buddhism. Not the blind faith of many religions which this one person was reacting to, but rather the faith to turn towards one's suffering and try to orient towards it as a tool to learn rather than something that is an obstacle, and see what happens. I think a useful reference point with all these things is the Buddha and his life. We look at the war in Ukraine or Europe or the news, and we can become alarmed and disheartened. And yet there's a place to remember, despite that tragedy, that first of all, that many few people die in wars now than they have for quite a long time. But more than that, to look to the Buddha's time and the complicated and brutal world he lived in and how he navigated it. And that is the standard and the expectation for us as practitioners. So the Buddha's life was in a time when the greater kingdoms of Kosala and Magadha were taking over the small tribal realms, and there's a great deal of war. One of the most intense instances of this, of the violence that the Buddha navigated, was one of his disciples, King Bimbisara of Magadha, the largest of the kingdoms, was an amazing practitioner and student. And he was murdered by his son, King Ajatasattu, in hopes of taking power. And years later, King Ajatasattu came to the Buddha and paid respects. And the Buddha did not turn him away, did not try to punish him. He received him. He taught him the Dhamma. He had compassion, and at the end of that, King Ajatasattu broke down and said, "I did something wrong. I killed my father, a good man." And the Buddha said, "One who acknowledges fault and takes on restraint grows on the path." And King Ajatasattu ended up being the patron of the first Buddhist council, where all the texts were consolidated, and is in many ways responsible for the fact that we still have the teaching. The Buddha was falsely accused at times. Another sect who was jealous bribed a prostitute to walk out of the monastery in the early morning, and then the next day they murdered her and dropped her body in a ditch. And the blame immediately focused on the Buddha and the Sangha. And this is tragic in so many ways. But the equanimity and the compassion with which even those conditions were navigated is something to remember, in that there was no lashing out or rage on the part of the Buddha, but rather saying these karma will come back. And the next week, the men bragging drunk in a tavern were arrested, and the issue resolved by the king. The Buddha's clan, the Sakyans, were also in great danger, and eventually after were slaughtered by another rival clan. And yet through all of this, you can see how these practitioners walked with utter kindness and care and compassion in every moment. Our particular flavor of samsara and of suffering is not unique. And yet when we look to this quality of transcendence and the potential of the human heart, we realize it is the biggest gift we can give in each of these moments. Hegel said that evil lies in the gaze that that sees evil all around it. And if we become caught in the headlines constantly and forget the field of love and gifts and giving that we exist in, then we risk our own hearts becoming tainted. And we risk forgetting what a bright garden we live in. So this quality of transcendence, the Buddha spoke of in terms of 4 levels: Sotapanna, stream entry, Sakadagami, once returner, Anagami, non-returner, and Arahant, which is a fully enlightened being. And the idea is that this transcendent part of the heart, which one can touch, when one encounters it, the heart and mind are irreversibly shifted and never return to where they were. And the Buddha spoke one of the most important stages on this path of transcendence is this quality of stream entry, which is the first encounter with this transcendent part of the heart. You might call it saintliness. And the qualities that the Buddha said were dropped at this moment, they're called the fetters. And the first 3 that drop at stream entry, when this heart first touches the deathless, are self-view, sakkaya ditthi, doubt, vicikiccha, and attachment to rites and rituals, silappata paramasa. The subsequent phases, when one encounters the deathless at a deeper level and lets go of more, then Sakadagami, once returners, sensual desire and aversion are weakened. Non-returner, the 3rd level, they're abandoned. And then the complete enlightenment, the 5 final fetters of conceit, ignorance, restlessness, and desire for rebirth in the material and immaterial realms are all abandoned at once. And I remember first encountering this teaching and thinking it was a fairly esoteric and silly, almost leveling system, until I heard Ajahn Nisabho speak to it. And he spoke about the fact that these are deepening levels of letting go. The Buddha parsed things out as best he was able. Our experience is frequently fairly continuous, and yet there are milestones. So this first level, stream entry, the 3 fetters that are dropped, self-view, attachment to rites and rituals, and doubt, are cultural conditioning. This is the conditioning we pick up after we are born. So self-view, sakkaya ditthi, it's the attachment to yourself as a man, a woman, a race, your name, your culture, all these things that are instilled in you and that you cling to as me, mine, and myself. And you can see the power of that fetter. So much of our pushing away, of our aversion, of how it's, interestingly recently with all this polarization in politics and elsewhere, it's interesting how the mind just is so hungry for that sense of being angry and self-righteously so. On Alms Round every day, I walk around the lawn with this little corgi who comes and just barks at me the entire way. And I just feel like telling it, this is exhausting for you and me. Why are you doing this? But our minds are exactly like that. We find something to just run after and just yip at again and again, and we can't, it's very hard to help ourselves. We are composed of a demon and an angel, an animal and a divine quality. And seeing how we love to dig our teeth into those juicy, polarizing issues, we begin to see the power of Sakkaya Ditthi, self-view, because only by pushing away from another do we get that strong, vibrant, intoxicating sense of what we are, of our own ego crystallizing. So we let go of that. And you can cultivate this very practically. You can step back from the news, have compassion for all those involved. And not that you don't want to stay informed, that's important, but you also have to take care of your own heart and acknowledge how much you can take without becoming drawn into these polarized elements. You can acknowledge that even those you would condemn act from ignorance. And in one sense, we are all just a bunch of blind people bumping into one another and doing our best, except for those few among us who are enlightened. Ajahn Amaro says that until arahantship, we are, no one's normal except for the arahants. The other way we can let go of Sakkaya Ditthi, self-view, is the thing I spoke of last week. In that, in meditation practice, we frequently divide practice into samatha and vipassana, tranquility and insight. Tranquility practice is ways of calming the mind, bringing it to one point. These can be metta practices, coming to the breath, mantra. Vipassana is when we begin to contemplate phenomena in our lives in the light of wisdom. And where the body becomes strong by moving and exercising, the mind becomes strong by remaining still and growing strong in silence. It's more like a flame. If it's constantly buffeted by the winds of thought, impression, contact, it sputters. So we hold it in quiet stillness until it grows bright enough for us to see clearly where we are. In one sense, Ajahn Jayasaro says that samatha and vipassana can just be summarized as stop and look. So practically what this means is usually we have a limited capacity for samadhi or samatha practice, for bringing the mind to calm. And those of us educated in the modern world and impacted by the likes of TikTok, other things, news, modern education, sometimes our samadhi is not as powerful as, say, a villager growing up in the Thai countryside 50 years ago. But our quality of wisdom is powerful. So what one does is, after spending a time in meditation in this state of calm, say following the breath very carefully, after a while the mind will begin to move inexorably. And instead of fighting it, because at some point you won't be able to, the mind's capacity for samadhi will be filled to the brim. You contemplate. You bring to mind those things that you've attached to in your life and elsewhere, and see that they are impermanent, they change, that they are not worth clinging to because they will slip away at some point. Anicca, anatta, dukkha, impermanent, not self, suffering or stress. Or you look at the body and begin to see through it, finding an object in it which really grabs the mind, such as the bones, and bringing them to mind, contemplating them. And this rips apart the sense of self in a very nitty-gritty way. This is useful to keep in mind for retreats as well, because this same pattern plays out on a broad scale, where after one has been meditating for 4 or 5 days or 2 weeks, Sometimes what the mind really wants is to pour its newfound energy into insight. So this is when one contemplates. And one of the reasons the mind can't see these things usually, can't see that the things it grabs to for refuge aren't stable, is because it has nowhere else to land. It's unwilling to see because it has no other source of happiness. So much of what we do in this practice, in cultivating a meditation object, the breath, in bringing to mind our goodness, in cultivating loving kindness, is we're creating a sense of happiness that is not dependent on external conditions, a glowing sense of self-worth. And Ajahn Nisabho would say that frequently one can measure one's progress on the path by that sense of value one has, not in a worldly sense, but knowing that one has a place and a purpose and a role in the world that is truly valuable. And as the mind becomes more and more confident in that, it can release more and more its white-knuckled grip on these other things of the world. And when it's done that, then one can interact with those things skillfully, with agility and lightheartedness and wisdom. Like Ajahn Chah says, we pick things up, but we pick them up lightly, and we know when to put them down. That applies to relationships, where one doesn't need to control how another person feels about one. And if one's loved one acts differently than one would wish, it's not a problem. One can just give and be there for them as they are, which is the gift of love towards freedom rather than love towards control, which is not love. And it also applies to the sense of self. One of the really amazing things to see in teachers who have practiced is the agility with which they can change nimbly the personality program, so to speak, that they're running. Ajahn Chah was famous for being able to, some monks would, one Western monk was giving him a back rub when he was receiving guests. And one moment he was admonishing a monk who had committed an offense with quite a lot of fierceness. And the next moment he turned and received a group of lay people with utter kindness and started laughing. And through it all, his shoulders, the monk said as he was giving him a back rub, were completely relaxed. So when we can approach our own personalities and our own identities with that same light touch, that's a movement towards this sense of letting go of self-identity. And we do it through restraint of the senses, pulling back from these things that bring up dualistic ways of thinking and self-righteousness. We do it through careful cultivation of insight through meditation. The other fetter that drops is doubt in the Buddha's teaching. And this is because when one touches that sense of the deathless, the teachers say that that's the point where one gains utter confidence that there is a path and what that path is. And that sense does not leave one. Last Wednesday, someone asked a question about what happens if a stream enterer is reborn? What would that person be like? And I have heard one story. Ajahn Jayasaro was talking about a famous nun in Thailand, a Mechi. And such a person, the teachers say, would have a really clear sense of morality, and from the very beginning, even though they might slip up every now and again a little bit, even from childhood. And yet there'd come a point where they step back into the stream and things suddenly change. and their entire life is once again dedicated to awakening. So the clearest example that I've heard of this was the Queen of Thailand, her former fashion advisor, who was a very refined woman. She'd fly to Europe and visit the opera. She loved beautiful clothing. She was entwined and integrated into the royal aristocracy. And then one day, she heard a forest Ajahn who'd come from his monastery out in the jungle give a teaching. And after he'd taught, he went around and asked the lay people something along the lines of if they'd be willing to, if they wanted, him to come back at a certain point, or something small. And she said, "I don't want that. I want to come live with you." And she gave up everything. She moved into a little hut with only 1 or 2 changes of clothes, just white. And she dedicated everything to meditation. And there's a great story of the queen coming and visiting her, because she was a bit confused where her fashion designer had gone. And she was sort of teetering across the rock on these high heels over to this little hut, and was just utterly confused and blown away by what this woman had suddenly become, giving up all these things of a life for the practice. And she's still alive. She lives near Ajahn Nisabho in Thailand. One of many awakened beings, perhaps, in Thailand who people could visit if they wanted to. And this sense of complete dissolution of doubt, perhaps it's not as relevant for our day-to-day practice all the time. But it speaks to something important. Ajahn Nisabho Ajahn Sucitto has said that we frequently look at Sakkaya Ditthi, this relinquishment of self-view, as the most important of the fetters dropped at this first level of awakening. But he says, look, that dropping of self-view is utterly predicated also on this sense of loss of doubt. Because there comes a point where the only way to let go of this constant need to crystallize our ego and our self again and again is when we step into a deeper and more sustained sense of who we are, or rather, where we're going. It's not so much an identity. David Stundal-Rost says that God is a direction. And this is the language I love about stream entry and the stream of Dhamma, is that you are swept along. It's a movement and it's harmony. And you notice this, is that when you align yourself with this path, when you taste these teachings for the first time, it's, for many of us, as if we've suddenly stepped into a stream that's been ready for us, and we are swept along completely. And I remember fighting that for a long time. I was meditating since I read Siddhartha when I was 15, but it was always like I had one foot in this river and one foot on the land, and it's just an awkward situation to be in. Like Ajahn Sona says, one foot in the monastery and one foot on a banana peel. And I remember when I finally decided to just try to go to a monastery, maybe to ordain, and suddenly everything aligned so quickly I could hardly imagine. But it doesn't take always a great act like that. Sometimes it can just be understanding finally what your life was meant for. Coming to a community, even just some Saturdays, and meeting people who actually get it. And I was so hungry for that as a lay person. I'd be meditating, an hour and a half a day, and I'd talk to my friends, and they'd be like, meditation's kind of cool. It's like, no, you don't get it. And a really great moment of that was when I decided to ordain, and I told another friend, and he said, yeah, I've tried ecstasy. I think I've seen what enlightenment's like. It's like, didn't continue that conversation. So you come to us, and the only place I found people who got it were within the circle of the Sangha, near the monasteries, near the monastics, not just the monastics, but those who touched it. One of the reasons we have perhaps 7 less people here at this gathering than we usually would is because about 7 of them have gone off to monasteries. We keep losing people, but in a really good way. So we lost Dennis last week. He's off to Ajahn Sona's for 3 to 6 months. Katie McKenna's down at Aloka Vihara. We have Daniel, Jeremy. Jeremy's at Temple. Daniel's at Abhayagiri. God, we have a few others. Rick? Oh, Rick's at Abhayagiri too. Yeah, and I believe Miles is preparing a Dharma van. So people here really understand. And the thing is, it's not predicated on going off to a monastery. One can really cultivate this path in a life. Juanita was talking, and I hope this is okay, about her mother, who had 10 children in a small town in Isan.
Village.
Where?
Village.
Yes. In Isan, not even a town. And Juanita would wake up in the evening or at night after her brothers and sisters had gone to sleep and see her mom walking meditation. It's very common in Thailand to do an all-night sit every Uposatha day, every full and new moon and half moon day in the monasteries. And the thing about these sits is that you have the monks kind of trying to be macho and sit it out through the night. But then at Wat Pananachat, about 80% of the people who come are village women who just will sit unmoving for maybe 8 hours. And if you ever want to really just completely see the power of village, that sort of faith and that potential as a householder for deep practice, then you can see it there. And this is another quality of stream entry, is it's something that is accessible to all people. It is a goal that we can touch as lay people, as monastics. The suttas are full of lay people becoming stream enterers. And the third fetter is sila pata paramasa, which is attachments to rites and rituals, ways of doing things. And frequently this is extended not just to ritual and believing that it has a sort of magical power, but to the conventions we grow up with in a culture, which is why it's another one of the fetters at this lighter level of cultural conditioning. And it's powerful to remember because it's a great distinction between Buddhism and many faiths, is that when we bow to an image, the image itself is not the essential quality, is not what we're necessarily bowing to. It's a way of remembering. So we do use ritual. As Ajahn Pasana said, the props are important. In our culture, we understand that internal motivation leads to external action. We have faith, so we come to a gathering. We have faith, so we bow. We like someone, so we give. What we've forgotten is that external embodied action has an effect on the heart. And this is the power of ritual. So if you keep the 5 precepts and you just stop killing the fly and the mosquito or the spider, then over time, after a few years, you find that the spider's kind of cute. It's weird, but it's kind of cute because you've restrained the impulse to see it as something worthy to kill a lot, and something shifted in your heart. If you put up a shrine in your house and you bow to it the first thing and the last thing in the day, then something in you will change. If at the end of every day, the last thing you do is dedicate the goodness of your life to those you love and to those in need, then something in you will change. If you find yourself really having a hard time with someone, say a certain political leader, then if you put their picture on your shrine and you bow to it as your teacher in patience and love, then you will change. So we use ritual, but we use it skillfully, and we don't get attached. And when speaking to this man who was talking about this distinction between the Christian upbringing and this Buddhist path, I think this is one of the real points of wisdom to raise up of the Buddha, is that the path, as many of you heard, is a raft. And he said, when you get to the other shore, you don't have to carry the raft with you. And so often we think of this raft as sort of a, Huckleberry Finn raft, and that we have to get these perfect wood and, strips to bind it all together before we row off. But that's not the raft that the Buddha was talking about. The image he uses is of a person just piecing together some sticks, whatever they can get, and pulling with their hands and kicking with their feet. It's just enough to keep you afloat. And the hands pulling, that's the right efforts of cultivating good states that haven't come into being, and bringing and strengthening good states that have come. And the kicking, that's abandoning negative states that have arisen and preventing negative states that have not yet arisen from arising. And this is helpful because it means you just take your life, however imperfect it is, with our own imperfect personalities, and that's what you use. You're not going to ever arrive at these perfect conditions, and yet this is exactly the situation that your life has given you to achieve transcendence through. It is exactly where you should be. Ajahn Buddhadasa said that if he was stuck on an island with one book, or someone asked, what is the one book you would take with you if you're stuck on a desert island? And he kind of went around the question and said, actually, I'd just take a little necklace that says, it's like this. And that's Ajahn Sumedho's go-to again and again, it's like this. So, these are the conditions we have. And they're conventional, we use them as we're able. But they are enough if we practice, if we establish mindfulness every day, if we keep that basic hygiene as a practitioner of meditating 30 minutes in the morning, at least, most days, if you can, at least. And there's usually a sea change, about 20 minutes of meditation a day. There's another sea change around 45 minutes of meditation a day, and then around an hour and a half. I don't know why, but those are pretty reliable markers. And however much you can give, then do that. And if you have one day you can set aside as a Sabbath day, then do that. And just to wrap up the levels of awakening, Ajahn Sumedho pointed to the fact that this first encounter with transcendence lets these first three fetters drop of cultural conditioning. The fetters that drop at a non-returner, the third stage of sensual lust and aversion, these are biological conditions. This is something that every being has in their body. And the fetters that drop at the fourth level of arahantship, of conceit, ignorance, restlessness, and desire for rebirth in the sensual form and formless realms, these are of the mind. So it's fun to talk about that every now and again. But what it comes down to is knowing that we can attain something, that there is a stream that will carry us, that the conditions we've been given are what we need, and that there's a sense of harmony that we can find if we come deeper and deeper into silence and listen more and more carefully to what's being said by that in us which is most true to ourselves. Even if that's being said in a middle school gym on a Saturday, and if you need any motivation to try to get out of continued rebirth, you can think about middle school. Okay. So we have some time for questions if people want to talk about anything specific for a few minutes. Live stream or otherwise. Go on, please. John.
Yeah, what was you mentioned a necklace and said something on the necklace?
Yeah, Ajahn Buddhadasa, he's an amazing teacher. He was a really incendiary figure because Thailand's Buddhism had become very ritualistic. So he came along, and I think he had no Buddha images in his monastery, maybe one. And his point was, look, it's about the path. Just an extremely wise teacher. Him and Ajahn Chah had an enormous amount of respect for one another. And actually, Jeff, I believe, met him.
Yeah.
And so he said that someone asked, what book would you take to a desert island if you could take one book? And he said, I'd take a little necklace that said, it's like this. That's it.
What does that mean exactly?
It means it's like this. This is how it is. Like, in Buddhism, there's three types of knowledge. There's Suttamaya Panya, we talked about this last week a little bit, which is knowledge from listening or hearing. There's Chintamaya Panya, which is wisdom from thinking or pondering. And then there's Bhavanamaya Panya, which is a wisdom that only comes when the mind is calm, which is what I was pointing to with that afterglow of samadhi allows you to access Bhavanamaya Panya. And something like a phrase like, it's like this, that's really a Bhavanamaya Panya reflection, because of course it's like this, like duh, you know. It's like the essential insight into stream entry is, in the first teaching, the great insight that ushers the first disciple into stream entry is yang kinchi samudaya damang sabantang nirodha damang ti. All that is subject to arising is subject to passing, which basically just means things change. That's it. And yet the Buddhist insight with Bhavanamaya Panya is that if we could just see those things clearly with a calm mind, that would be enough, because then the heart would stop clinging to everything that it's not, and then it would be what it would come to what is beyond that, nibbana. And similarly, if it stopped trying to make everything a certain way and think that it's wrong, and just acknowledge it's like this, then that sense of suffering, the second arrow that we shoot ourselves with again and again, would disappear too. So it's just a reflection for the calm mind.
Okay, so it's referring to the way things are in reality.
Desert island, middle school gym, bad career, monastery, the person sitting next to you breathing too loudly, any of it. It's like this. Yeah. It's one of the powerful things about the Buddha's epithet for himself was the Tathagata. And tata means thus, and gata means gone, or agata means come. And so it's a poetic twist that the Buddha used as a label for himself of thus come and thus gone. And I think what it refers to is just language breaks down, but for me, it's almost this poetic thing of ta-ta-ta, thusness. It's like this. It's almost, he's pointing to something that's just this sense of stability and understanding that this is how things are. And it doesn't mean we don't try to change it, but it means that sense of everything just being wrong, like it shouldn't be like this. That's a lot of the issue. Like, I think Ajahn Jeff says, expectations are pre-planned resentments. Similar, not exactly, yeah. Thank you. It's the thing is that people don't, it's the essential objection you have to face when you're starting this path, is that some people are not happy about you leaving the dinner table early to go meditate or pulling back. And they can take it as an affront or leaving or abandoning them. And this is especially brutal as a monk, where you're leaving everyone. And my recollection again and again was that this path is the biggest gift you can give anyone. Because people don't need another person to go to the movies with or have coffee with. They've got enough of that. But there will come a time, even for those who don't understand, where they get the divorce happens, or they get cancer, or they're on their deathbed. And if they have just one person in their life who's taken a bold step towards something beyond, then they have something to hold to, and it is the biggest gift you can possibly give to people, even if they don't understand initially. And I just remember coming back to the West after having been away for 7 years, and the most unexpected people who had gotten cancer, who'd come down with this, who'd lost something great, or some who just had suddenly become hungry for something else through that steady dissolution of purpose. Because like the suburban dream, depression rates in the US are higher than anywhere. They compared depression rates in suburban and urban areas of Nigeria and the US. And I think depression rates in the urban US were the highest, and about 6 times that of other places. Like, the suffering of middle-class Americans is not, suffering is suffering. And just because we lose our purpose and our sense of direction and kind of this confluence of comfort and convenience, and the fact that that tragedy happens slowly without us almost even knowing, just a subtle nausea and eating away, does not make it less tragic, So yeah, I think coming here is really a gift. So one beautiful thing we do is we usually try to dedicate this gift and this goodness to those who have passed or to those we want to bring to mind. And it's called spreading merit, but it's a way of changing our memory, remembering that this isn't just for us. Changing our relationship to the memory of someone who's passed towards one of brightness. So before we chant, do we have a blessing braid, Bree? Oh, just a second. There's a bathroom happening. It's okay. No, it's cool. Does anyone have people they'd like to bring to mind now who are having difficulty or they'd like to remember and just dedicate goodness to? You can just say their name. Sophia? Valeria. John? Jesse. Ian. Butch. Okay, and all those in Ukraine, I suppose, as well. Soldiers of both sides as well. So turn to page 27. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice. And through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dharma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled.